The dinner table was still set when he said it. My plate was full. The candles were still burning. Outside, the neighbors' Christmas lights were blinking through the front window in slow red and green flashes like they were counting down to something I didn't know was coming. My son looked at me from across that table, the one I had sat at for 9 years, the one I had bought, and he said the words so cleanly, so carefully, like he had been practicing them. He said I was dead weight. He said they wanted their house back. He said it on Christmas Eve while his wife sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes pointed at the floor, and my two grandchildren were upstairs in rooms I had painted with my own hands. I did not raise my voice. I did not knock anything over. I picked up my napkin from my lap, set it beside my plate, pushed my chair back slowly, and said okay, just okay. And that one word, that single quiet word, was the beginning of something none of them were ready for. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something honestly. If someone you had given 9 years of your life to, someone you had quietly carried without complaint, looked you in the eye on Christmas Eve and called you dead weight, what would you do? Would you argue? Would you beg them to see the truth? Would you leave without a word? Think about that while you listen, because what Reid chose to do in that moment is not what most people expect, and it changed everything. My name is Reid. I am 61 years old. I spent 9 years of my life living in a house that I funded, in a family that I supported, being called a guest by people who had no idea what their comfort actually cost. This is the story of how I became invisible inside my own generosity, and what happened the night someone finally said out loud what they had been saying with their actions for years. Let me take you back to where it really started, because this story did not begin on Christmas Eve. It began 11 years ago when my son Daniel called me from a city 2 states away and told me that he and his wife Renee were expecting their first child and that they were struggling. He used that word carefully, struggling, like it was a door he was cracking open just a little, just enough to see if I would walk through it. I walked through it. I had retired early from a 30-year career in civil engineering. I had my pension, I had my savings. My wife Patricia had passed 4 years before that call from Daniel, and the house we had raised him in had started to feel like it had too many rooms and not enough reasons to fill them. When Daniel called, I heard something in his voice that I recognized from when he was a boy. He did not ask for help directly, he never did. But the need was there underneath every sentence, breathing quietly between the words. I sold my house. I moved 2 states away. I moved into Daniel and Renee's home, which at that time was a 3-bedroom rental that was too expensive for what Daniel earned as a mid-level logistics coordinator and what Renee brought in part-time as a bookkeeper. I did not move in as a guest. I moved in as a contributor. That was the understanding, or at least it was my understanding. Within the first 3 months, I had helped them put a down payment on a real house. Not the rental, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street with a good school district because the baby was coming and Daniel wanted his child to grow up in a neighborhood with a certain feel. I understood that. I had wanted the same thing for him once. The down payment was $60,000. It came from my savings. I did not ask for anything in return. I asked only that we be clear with each other about how the household would work going forward. Daniel said, "Of course, Dad." He said he was grateful. He shook my hand like I was a business partner, which should have told me something about how he saw the arrangement, but I was happy and hopeful, and I chose not to read too much into a handshake. For the first 2 years, it was good, not perfect, but good. I had my own room. I watched my grandson Eli arrive in the world, and then 2 years later, I watched my granddaughter Nora follow him. I was there for those births. I held those children hours after they took their first breaths. I read to them every night when Daniel and Renee went out for dinner, which they did often because they needed space. They said they needed couple time, which I understood and never complained about. I cooked most of the meals in that house. I drove the children to their appointments. I fixed things when they broke. I paid a portion of the monthly mortgage, a portion that Daniel had suggested and I had agreed to, and I paid my share of the utilities without being asked. But here is what slowly changed, so gradually that I did not see it happening until it had already happened completely. I stopped being a person in that house and became a function. It is hard to explain what that feels like from the outside. From the outside, it looks like a normal multi-generational home. A grandfather living with his son's family, helping out, being present. That is how it probably looked to the neighbors, to Renee's mother when she visited for the holidays, to the people at Daniel's office who knew he had his father living with them. It probably looked generous on his part, accommodating, modern even. From the inside, it felt like I was slowly being edited out of the story. The first thing I noticed was the language around the house. Daniel stopped saying our house and started saying my house. Just a small word change, just a quiet shift in pronoun, but I heard it. I heard it the way you hear a sound in the night that you cannot name but that you know is wrong. He would say things like, "I need the living room tonight," or "We need the kitchen cleared by 6. And there was something in the way he said it that positioned me as a tenant in a building he owned rather than a man who had made the building possible. Then came the dinners. For the first 2 years I ate with the family every night. Then Renee started making comments about needing family time, just the four of us, you understand, and those dinners became every other night and then twice a week, and then something that happened only on Sundays. I began eating alone in my room on most evenings, listening to the sounds of my grandchildren laughing at a table that I had paid for, in a room I had helped choose the paint color for, in a house that my $60,000 had made possible. I told myself this was normal. I told myself that young families need their space and their privacy and their rhythms. I told myself that I was lucky to be close to my grandchildren, lucky to be useful, lucky not to be alone in some apartment somewhere waiting for my phone to ring. I told myself that story for 7 more years. There were moments that should have broken through my patience sooner. There was the summer Daniel and Renee went on a 2-week vacation to Portugal and asked me to watch the children, which I was glad to do. But when they came back, there was no thank you, no acknowledgement, nothing except Renee asking if I had remembered to water her plants because 2 of them looked a little dry. There was the Thanksgiving when Renee's parents came to stay, and I was asked to sleep on a fold-out cot in the basement so that her mother could have my room because the guest room was being used for storage. I slept on that cot for 5 nights and I told myself it was fine. There was the time Daniel came home from work frustrated about something that had happened with a colleague, and he walked into the kitchen where I was washing dishes and he snapped at me about the way I had organized the refrigerator, telling me that I needed to understand that this was his home and his space and he had a system. And I stood there at the sink with wet hands and I said, yes, you are right, I am sorry. And he left the room and I finished the dishes, and later that night I lay in my room and stared at the ceiling for a long time. There was the Christmas 3 years before the one that changed everything, when I bought gifts for both children and for Daniel and Renee and wrapped them carefully and placed them under the tree, and Renee opened her gift and said oh and set it aside, and that was all. Just oh, no thank you, no acknowledgement. Just oh, and then she moved on to the next package. Daniel did not notice, or if he noticed, he chose not to say anything. I noticed everything, I always had. I just kept choosing quiet over confrontation because I believed that family was worth the discomfort, that patience was a virtue, that people who loved each other did not need to keep score. But people who do not keep score eventually run out of points without realizing it. In the 9th year, things became different in a way I could not ignore. Daniel had been promoted at work. His title was now Regional Operations Director, and his salary had nearly doubled from when I had first moved in. Renee had grown her bookkeeping work into a small business with 3 clients and was pulling in real income for the first time in years. They had bought a second car. They had redone the kitchen. They had started talking about a vacation home. I was happy for them. I genuinely was. I had wanted them to succeed. Part of the reason I had shown up in that house 9 years ago was so that they could have the stability to build something. Watching them succeed should have felt like the payoff for everything I had invested. Instead, it felt like I was being slowly released without anyone telling me. The conversations about the house changed. Daniel started making comments about equity and space and long-term plans in a way that always seemed to circle around my presence without landing directly on it. He would say things like, we are thinking, gee, about what the house looks like in 5 years, or Renee and I have been talking about the setup here and what makes sense going forward. He never finished those thoughts when I was in the room. He would trail off or change the subject, and I would nod and say sounds good and go back to whatever I was doing. Renee started being more direct in smaller ways. She began leaving notes on the kitchen counter about shared spaces. Not angry notes, not rude notes, just administrative notes. Things like, please remember to wipe the stovetop after cooking, or the upstairs bathroom schedule is changing. She had started treating the household like a property management situation, and I was the tenant whose lease was coming up for review. I felt it all. I absorbed every signal. And still I said nothing because I did not want to cause trouble, because I did not want Daniel to feel pressure, because I kept telling myself I was imagining the worst interpretation of things that might have perfectly innocent explanations. Then Christmas Eve came. It was a Tuesday. I had been in the kitchen since 9 in the morning. I had made the glazed ham, I had made the roasted vegetables, I had baked the cornbread and the sweet potato casserole and the apple cake that Eli loved. I had set the table myself, put out the good plates, lit the candles, arranged the centerpiece. I had wrapped and labeled every gift under the tree. I had been in that house since 7 in the morning, the only one awake, doing the work of Christmas for a family that did not seem to notice how Christmas got done. Daniel and Renee came downstairs around noon. The children had been up since 7 with me, helping me stir batter and laughing at the shapes I made with the pie crust. Those were the best hours of that day. The 4 hours before anyone else woke up, just me and Eli and Nora in the warm kitchen, flour on their noses, music playing low on the radio. When Daniel and Renee came down and saw the food, Renee said, it smells good in here. Not thank you, not this is beautiful, just it smells good in here. like she was commenting on a candle. Daniel poured himself coffee and looked at the spread and said, "Looks like you have been busy," and went to sit in the living room to look at his phone. I kept moving, I kept cooking, I kept being useful. At dinner that evening, we all sat down together. Eli and Nora were excited and loud in the best way, the way children are on Christmas Eve when the promise of the next morning is still completely intact. I watched them and felt something that I can only describe as a complicated kind of happiness, the kind that has a shadow in it. We were halfway through dinner when Daniel set his fork down. He looked at Renee first, a quick look the kind couples give each other when they have rehearsed something. Then he looked at me, and he said, "Dad, Renee and I have been talking, and we think it is time to have an honest conversation." I set my fork down too. He said they had been thinking about the house and their family and their future. He said that as much as they appreciated everything, the arrangement had run its course. He said Renee's business was growing and they were planning an expansion that would require her home office space. He said the children were getting older and needed more independence in the house. He said that they felt it was time for me to make other arrangements. And then he said it. He said, "Dad, honestly, it feels like you have become dead weight around here. We want our house back." Dead weight. He said those two words so easily, like they had been sitting in his mouth for a long time and he was finally just letting them go. I looked at Renee, she was looking at the table. I looked at Eli and Nora. Eli was staring at his plate. Nora was looking at me with large eyes that did not understand what had just happened but knew that something had. I looked back at my son. I thought about the $60,000. I thought about 9 years of mortgage contributions. I thought about 9 years of utilities. I thought about every meal I had cooked, every child I had driven, every broken thing I had fixed, every vacation I had made possible by staying home, every night I had eaten alone in my room so that they could have family time without me in it. I thought about all of that in the space of about 4 seconds. And then I said, "Okay." Just that, okay. Daniel blinked. I think he expected something different. I think he expected me to argue, to defend myself, to cry, to beg, to negotiate. I think the performance of asking me to leave had been prepared for a bigger audience reaction than the one he got. I picked up my napkin and set it by my plate. I pushed back my chair. I looked at Eli and Nora and I smiled because they did not deserve to carry the weight of that moment, and I went upstairs to my room. I did not sleep that night, but I did think very carefully about what I had agreed to and had that agreement was actually going to look like once I started pulling my name off of things. Because here is what Daniel did not know or what he had chosen to forget in the comfortable fog of 9 years of being provided for. My name was not just on the door when I moved in. My name was still on things, important things, permanent things, things that had been signed before the house was legally sound, before the mortgage was fully arranged, before the escrow cleared. Daniel had a complicated credit situation when we bought the house 9 years ago. He had 2 old defaults on his record and the bank had asked for a cosigner. I had co-signed the mortgage. I had done it because he was my son and because I believed in him and because the alternative was that he and Renee and my unborn grandson would not have the house they needed. My name was on the mortgage. Not as an afterthought, as a structural pillar, as the cosigner without whom the loan would never have been approved. And in the 9 years since then, Daniel had never refinanced to remove me. He had talked about it twice. Once about 4 years in when rates changed, and he had said he was going to look into it, and then he never did, and I had not pushed because I did not think it mattered, because I was not planning to leave, because I was not planning to become dead weight. But now I was leaving. And when I left, I had every legal right to take my name off of that mortgage, which meant the bank would review the loan, which meant the bank would look at whether Daniel, on his own, without my co-signature, without my credit history, without my clean financial record propping up his application, still qualified. I did not threaten this that night, I did not mention it. I just lay in my room in the dark and understood, for the first time in 9 years, what the word okay was actually capable of. In the morning, I began packing. I was methodical about it. I had more in that house than I had realized. 9 years of a person's life takes up physical space, books and tools and clothing and the quiet accumulation of a life lived somewhere. I packed carefully and I packed slowly because I wanted to do it right. I also called my financial advisor. I called him on the 26th, the morning after Christmas. His name was Gerald and he had been managing my account since before Patricia died. I explained the situation to him simply. I told him I was leaving the house. I told him I needed to understand my options regarding the mortgage co-signature. Gerald was quiet for a moment, then he asked me how soon I was planning to move. I told him within 30 days. He said he would make some calls. Daniel watched me pack over the next few days without saying much. He seemed relieved at first. There was a looseness in his posture that had not been there before, a lightness that told me everything I needed to know about how long he had been waiting to have that conversation, how long he had been carrying the want of it, how much the asking had cost him nothing. Renee was different. Renee watched me pack with something else on her face, something that was not quite guilt but was in the neighborhood of it. I caught her a few times in the hallway looking like she wanted to say something, and each time she opened her mouth she seemed to decide against it and just said something ordinary, something about the weather or whether I needed boxes, and moved on. The children were the hardest part. Eli, who was 8 by then, came to my door on the second day and asked where I was going. I told him I was going to find my own place, a place just for me. He asked why. I told him that sometimes people needed their own space and that it did not change anything about how much I loved him. He stood in my doorway for a moment, and then he came in and sat on my bed and watched me fold shirts and did not say anything else. And that quiet sitting beside me was one of the most painful and most loving things I can remember from that whole period. Nora was 6. She did not fully understand. She kept asking when I was coming back for movie night. I kept saying soon, sweetheart, and I hated myself a little for the vagueness of it, but I could not explain to a 6-year-old the adult architecture of what was happening in her home. I moved into a furnished apartment on January 4th. It was a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building 12 minutes from Daniel's house. It was clean and quiet and smaller than my room in Daniel's house had been. I stood in the living room on that first night and looked at the bare walls and the rental furniture and the city lights through the window, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Free. Not happy exactly, not relieved exactly, but free. Like a pressure I had been breathing through for years had finally been removed, and I could take a full breath again for the first time since I had walked through that front door with a check for $60,000 and a heart full of hope. I called Gerald on January 6th. He had already spoken to the mortgage servicer. The process to formally remove my co-signature would require a loan assumption review, which would evaluate Daniel's standalone qualification. Gerald was gentle but direct when he summarized the likely outcome. Daniel's current credit was better than it had been 9 years ago, but his debt-to-income ratio had shifted since the kitchen renovation and the second car and a small business loan Renee had taken out 18 months ago. Gerald said the bank would probably not automatically drop him, but they would flag the account for review, and if the review found material changes in the cosigner's participation, they could call for refinancing. In plain language, if I removed my name, Daniel would have to refinance. And when Daniel tried to refinance on his own, without my income history and credit score anchoring the application, he would likely face a significantly higher interest rate, possibly much higher. Gerald estimated the difference could add $600 to $800 per month to their payment. I sat with that information for a long time. I want to be very clear about what I felt in those moments because I think it matters. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindictive. I did not rub my hands together and celebrate. I felt sad. I felt genuinely sad that my son had gotten himself into a position where his comfort depended on a foundation he did not respect. I felt sad that 9 years of love and labor and money had been summarized as dead weight by the person I had done it all for. I felt sad for Renee, who I think had not fully thought through the financial implications of what she and Daniel had decided. I felt sad for Eli and Nora, who had nothing to do with any of it. But I also felt something else. I felt clarity. I felt the clean, hard edge of a decision made from self-respect rather than fear. I had spent 9 years making decisions from fear. Fear of being alone, fear of being a burden, fear of losing access to my grandchildren, fear of Daniel's disapproval, fear of seeming difficult or ungrateful or old. I was done being afraid. I filed the paperwork on January 11th. I notified the mortgage servicer in writing that I intended to request removal as cosigner and formally initiated the review process. I was polite in the letter. I was factual. I stated my name, the property address, the loan number, and my intention to be removed. I did not explain why. I did not attach an emotional note. I just initiated a process that I was legally entitled to initiate. Daniel called me on January 18th. He did not call to apologize. He called to ask about the letter the bank had sent. His voice was tight when I answered, tight in a way that told me he had read that letter more than once and that it had not sat quietly inside him. He said, "Dad, what is this? What did you do? What does this mean?" He said it all in one breath almost. I said I was initiating my removal from the mortgage since I was no longer living at the property. He said I could not just do that. I said I could. He said I was being vindictive. I said I was being practical. He said the bank had called them and told them they might need to refinance, and that the new rates would be significantly higher than their current rate, and that he and Renee were looking at potentially $700 more per month, and that was not fair, that was not right, that was not what he had expected. I listened to everything he said, I waited until he was finished, and then I asked him one question. I asked him what he had expected. There was silence on the line, a long silence. He said he had not expected me to do something like this. I said I had not expected to be called dead weight on Christmas Eve, but here we both were, adjusting to things we had not expected. He hung up. He called back 40 minutes later. He was calmer, but the tightness was still there underneath the calm, the way ice is still underneath water even when the surface looks smooth. He said he wanted to talk. He said he wanted to sit down in person and talk through this properly. He said he and Renee were sorry for how the conversation at Christmas had gone, that they had handled it badly, that they should have been more thoughtful. I noticed the passive voice. They had handled it badly. The conversation had gone wrong. Things had happened that were not ideal. No one was the subject of those sentences. No one had done anything to anyone. I told him I would think about whether I wanted to meet. I did not say yes, I did not say no, I said I would think about it. That was true, I did think about it. I thought about it for 3 days, and during those 3 days I had a longer conversation with Gerald and also a conversation with a lawyer named Sandra Fitch, who had been recommended to me by Gerald's colleague. Sandra specialized in real estate and estate planning, and she had seen situations like mine before. She was direct and unsentimental in the way that good lawyers usually are. She told me that I was within my rights to pursue removal, but that the process could take time and could become complicated if Daniel contested it, which he could do, though his grounds would be limited. She also told me something that I had not fully thought through. She asked me about my estate planning. She asked me whether I had a current will. I told her I had not updated my will since Patricia died. She said that might be something to address sooner rather than later, given the financial and emotional terrain I was navigating. She said it gently, but she was right. I made an appointment with Sandra for the following week. In the meantime, Daniel left 2 more voicemails. The first one was a longer version of what he had said on the call, more of the same, we need to talk, this is bigger than I realized, I think we got off on the wrong foot, Renee is really stressed. The second one was shorter and had a different quality to it. His voice was quieter in that second message. Less tight, less pressured. He said, Dad, I know I messed up. I know I said something I should not have said, I just want you to know that. I played that second message 3 times. I did not call him back right away. I wanted to think about what it meant, whether it was regret or damage control, whether there was a difference anymore, whether it mattered which one it was. I updated my will with Sandra. I want to pause here and say something plainly. Updating my will was not an act of punishment toward Daniel. It was not me deciding to disinherit my son in a fit of wounded pride. The decision I made with Sandra was more nuanced and more considered than that. I restructured the distribution of my assets to reflect the reality of my situation and my relationships. I created education trusts for Eli and Nora, directing a portion of my estate directly to those trusts regardless of what happened between me and Daniel. I ensured that my grandchildren would not be affected by the outcome of the adult decisions being made around them. I made adjustments to what would go directly to Daniel versus what would be structured to protect specific assets. Sandra said it was one of the more thoughtful reorganizations she had seen from someone in a family dispute. It was not about taking away. It was about making sure the right things went to the right people for the right reasons. Daniel did not know about the will at this point. He would eventually. I agreed to meet him in the second week of February. I chose a coffee shop, not the house, not anywhere associated with his territory, a neutral place. I arrived before him and I ordered my coffee and I sat in a booth by the window and I felt steady, quiet, like the center of something that had stopped spinning. He came in looking like he had not slept well. He was well dressed the way he always was, but there was something worn around his eyes, something that told me he had been carrying this for weeks. He sat across from me and ordered his coffee and we went through the normal gestures of looking at each other. How are you? Fine, you look well, thank you. Then he started talking. He went through a version of things that I had expected. He said he was sorry. He said that Christmas Eve had been a mistake, that the timing was terrible, that they had not thought through how to have the conversation, that he had used words he did not mean. He said things at home had been stressful with Renee's business and his new role and the kids growing up so fast, and he had let that stress spill into something he regretted. He said he wanted to fix things. I listened to all of it, I let him finish. I drank my coffee slowly. Then I said what I needed to say. I said I had heard everything he said, and I believed that he was sorry in the way that people are sorry when they get caught in consequences they did not anticipate. I said I believed he had not planned to be cruel, that the word dead weight had probably surprised even him when it came out, that he had been carrying something uncomfortable for a long time, and it had finally come out in the ugliest possible packaging. I said I also believed something else. I said the problem was not one bad night. I told him about the dinners I had started eating alone. I told him about the cot in the basement. I told him about the 9 years of contributions I had made to a household where I eventually stopped having a full seat at the table. I told him that the Christmas Eve conversation was not an isolated event but the loudest moment in a very long pattern, and that patterns do not get fixed with apologies. Daniel was quiet for most of that. He flinched at a few things. The cot in the basement made him look down at his coffee. I could tell that some of what I was describing he had not cons. Shislai registered as what it was. That some of the ways Renee had managed the household around me had happened gradually enough that he had just absorbed it as normal without asking whether it was right. I did not want to perform anger at him. I did not want to watch him feel terrible for the sake of watching it. That was not what I was there for. I was there to tell the truth, calmly, completely, once, so that the rest of whatever happened between us would happen on a foundation of truth rather than comfortable fiction. He asked me what I wanted, not in a rude way, in a genuine way. A boy asking his father what it would take to make things right. I told him that what I wanted was for him to understand what he had actually done and what I had actually given, and for that understanding to be real rather than strategic. I told him that I was not interested in returning to the arrangement that had ended on Christmas Eve, because that arrangement had not been healthy for me. And somewhere underneath everything it had not been healthy for him either, because it had let him live inside a kind of comfort that did not require gratitude, and that kind of comfort tends to shape people in ways they do not notice until it is too late. He asked about the mortgage. I told him I was continuing the process. He said, "Dad, $700 more a month is a real problem for us." I said I understood that. He said, "So what do I do?" I told him he would need to talk to the bank, get his own finances fully reviewed, and determine what refinancing terms were available to him. I told him that Gerald could give him a referral to a mortgage broker if he needed one. I told him that it would probably be hard for a few months, but that hard and impossible are not the same thing, and that I had faith in his ability to navigate hard things. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "You sound like you have thought about all of this for a long time." I said I had. I told him I had been thinking about it for most of the 9 years I had lived in that house, in the quiet way that people think about things they are not yet ready to do anything about. He asked if there was any chance I would consider staying on the mortgage for a temporary period to give them time to get their finances reorganized. 6 months, he said, just 6 months to sort things out. I said I would consider it under one condition. He leaned forward. I said the condition was this. We would put in writing through a lawyer the financial history of the past 9 years, the down payment, the mortgage contributions, every documented financial contribution I had made to the household, not as a demand for repayment, not as a lawsuit, just as a written record of what had happened, acknowledged by both parties so that it could never be revisited or revised or forgotten. So that my contribution to that house would live somewhere in writing, not just in my memory. He was quiet for a moment, then he said okay. We hired separate lawyers. It took about 6 weeks. Daniel had to sit with his lawyer and go through bank records and receipts and years of transactions, and I suspect that process, seeing the actual numbers laid out, was its own kind of education. Sandra was efficient and thorough on my side. When the final document was signed, it reflected $62,000 in down payment, nearly $40,000 in mortgage copayment over 9 years, and a conservative estimate of the value of care and household contribution that both parties agreed had been substantial. It was not a legal claim, it was a record, an acknowledgement. Daniel signed it, and I believe that signing it changed something in him. Not everything, not overnight, but something. I stayed on the mortgage for the 6 months we agreed to. I also began seeing my grandchildren regularly again, on terms that I set, not on terms that were granted to me when it was convenient. I started picking up Eli from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I started Saturday morning breakfast with Nora at a diner near my apartment where she could order whatever she wanted, and I would tell her stories about her grandmother Patricia that she had not heard yet. I did not go back to Daniel's house for those 6 months except twice. The first time was for Eli's 9th birthday party. The second time was for Easter, which Renee asked me about carefully, cautiously, like she was not sure what the answer would be. I said yes to Easter because the children deserved a holiday that was not broken. Renee was different those times. She was not warm in a sudden miraculous way, but she was careful, she was present. She made eye contact with me in a way she had not in years. Once, at Eli's birthday, she came to stand beside me while we were watching the kids run around the yard, and she said quietly, without looking at me, that she had not understood the full picture until Daniel walked her through the documents. She said she was sorry. Just those 3 words said to the side, to the air between us and the children. I said thank you for saying that. And we both stood there watching the kids for a few more minutes and did not need to say anything else. At the end of the 6 months, Daniel refinanced. He qualified on his own finally at a rate that was about $400 more per month than his old rate. Less than the 700 Gerald had originally estimated, because Daniel had paid down some debt in those 6 months with a focus I had not seen from him in a long time. He told me he had cut up 2 credit cards. He told me Renee had closed the business loan early. He told me they had made some choices about how they were spending. When the refinance was complete and my name officially came off the mortgage, Daniel called me. He said, "Thank you, Dad." Not for staying on the mortgage, not for the financial arrangements. He said thank you, just that, and I understood he meant for more than the paperwork. He meant for the conversation in the coffee shop. He meant for the document. He meant for not folding when he expected me to fold. He meant for the Tuesday and Thursday pickups and the Saturday breakfasts and the way I had kept showing up for his children even when I had every reason to step back from his house. He meant for not abandoning him even after he had tried to abandon me. I am 61 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that I have made my own over these months. I have put things on the walls. I have a good chair by the window. I cook for myself and I enjoy it more than I have in years because when you cook for yourself, you cook exactly what you want and nobody critiques your refrigerator organization. I see Eli and Nora regularly. I see Daniel with something that is slowly rebuilding into something real between us, something that is more honest than what we had before, which I believe will eventually make it stronger. Renee is different, not a different person, but different with me, more careful, more present. There is something between us now that is not warmth exactly, but is respect. And I have learned in 61 years that respect is more durable than warmth and more useful in the long run. I think about Christmas Eve sometimes. I think about the candles on the table and the blinking lights through the window and my plate full of food that I had cooked, and the 2 words my son said across that table with his hands folded and his eyes clear and his voice rehearsed. Dead weight. I do not think about those words with anger anymore. I think about them as the most honest thing he ever said to me, even if he said it wrong. He was expressing something real, not that I was dead weight, but that he did not know how to have me in his life in a healthy way, that the arrangement we had built was not right for either of us, that we had both been avoiding the conversation we needed to have for too long. He just found the cruelest possible sentence to begin a conversation that could have been something else. People say things from fear. People say hard things from pressure. People sometimes say the worst version of a true thing because they have not found the honest version yet. I do not excuse what he said, but I understand it differently now than I did that night. What I did after that night I am still proud of. I did not beg, I did not collapse, I did not take my name off everything and disappear into my hurt. I stayed close to the children who needed me. I asked for what was right without demanding punishment. I told the truth about what had happened in writing signed by both of us so that it could not be revised. I found my own space. I found my own rhythm. I found that the life I had been living inside someone else's house, making myself smaller every year to fit their comfort, was not actually living. It was waiting, and I was done waiting for people to finally see my value. I know my value now. I have always known it, I think. But there is a difference between knowing a thing and being willing to act on it. There is a difference between understanding that you deserve better and actually standing up and choosing better. The night I said okay and pushed my chair back from that Christmas table, I did not know what I was beginning. I just knew that I was done sitting in a room where I had been reduced to 2 words. I was Marcus Reid. I had given decades of love and labor and money to people I would give my life for. I had built things. I had held things together. I had shown up in the dark and the cold and the years of ordinary difficulty that nobody makes videos about. And I was not dead weight. I was the foundation. And when the foundation walks away, you find out very quickly what was actually holding everything up. Daniel knows that now, not as a lesson I taught him with anger, but as a truth he discovered when the bank sent the letter and the numbers told the story that his heart had been too comfortable to read. I am not angry at my son. I love my son. I will love him for the rest of my life. But I love him now from a place of clarity, from a place where my own name and my own worth are not on the table for negotiation, from a place where okay means something different than it used to. Okay used to mean I will absorb this. Now it means watch what happens next. Those 2 things sound similar, but they are not the same at all. Before you leave, I want to ask you to think about one thing. Marcus Reid could have argued that night. He could have yelled, defended himself, listed everything he had given, demanded that his son take the words back. Most of us would have, but he did not. He said okay. He let the truth do what truth does when you stop standing in front of it. If you have ever stayed quiet too long in a place where you were giving everything and being treated like nothing, if you have ever kept the peace when what you really needed was to keep yourself, leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done in that chair. And if someone in your life needs to hear this story today, share it with them. Because some people need to know that walking away quietly can be the loudest, strongest thing a person ever does.